Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, and today we are going to be starting to get more so in the mindset of basketball down the stretch of the regular season as the NBA starts back up today coming out of the All-Star break. And this is when we sort of start to enter the prime of the NBA season, at least regular season, obviously ramping then into playoffs. So we're going to be talking the biggest storylines down the latter half of the season. We are going to be talking about, there was some discussion at All-Star Weekend about who is going to be the next face of the NBA. So we'll be talking about that idea. We will then be talking about the other takeaway that I had from All-Star Weekend before we sort of close the page there, where Adam Silver talked about the G League Ignite program that they have running and how the future doesn't seem to be great for that. And additionally, how this whole experiment has affected the state of college basketball. And then finally, we're going to end the show with a story about Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni and how he began to spiral out of control after a very strange incident took place in their game against the 49ers. Before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like and follow wherever you keep up with us, and for our live viewers to utilize the chat as much as possible, make this as interactive of a show as possible. And additionally, if you would like to or to tip or donate, to use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. On that note, our first segment here, talking about the biggest storylines for the second half of the NBA season. Obviously, the NBA itself is a league that, as much as I enjoy basketball itself, there has been, and it's funny because this is a little bit of a microcosm of all that went on with JJ Redick and his past couple days talking about the NBA. It's about the basketball first, but the NBA, more so than any other professional league in America, is a little bit of a soap opera, and the storylines surrounding the league are always a massive part of the entire picture of the league itself. So we are going to be talking about the biggest storylines. I think that it starts with, sort of on that same note about JJ Redick in the past couple days, talking about the Milwaukee Bucks and whether or not Doc Rivers is going to be able to turn it around, which I think baseline off of how they've started during his tenure, they will turn it around some, but how much can he fully get the Bucks going and get them towards contention? We've been talking about it for weeks. It has been a rough start since Doc Rivers has taken over with the Milwaukee Bucks. They are 3-7. Their offense has fallen off of a cliff as they were one of the best offenses in the NBA, and that has seen a drastic dip since then. And it hasn't all been negative, I think, because the defense has risen up about to the mediocre. They sit at 18th in defensive efficiency, which definitely isn't great, but you also look at where they were headed into this stretch under Doc Rivers. They were miserable. I still think they need to figure out, and again, figure out is sort of interesting because a lot of it does seem to be effort. Now, there are schematic factors that come into play, but their transition defense has been horrendous up to this point, and their effort levels at times as well have not seemed to be very good. So I think that that's something that the Bucks have to figure out down the second half of the season before we actually enter the playoffs, and they have to game in, game out, match up against the other best teams in the conference. Because if you look back to when Adrian Griffin was running the Bucks, it was pretty clear that I think, if you get a Damian Lillard hot scoring night, they were going to be hard to beat. But when you looked at the idea of them going into a 7-game series against, again, these top competitors in their conference, they were going to need to solely rely on the offense to carry them through the series. Now, I know that they haven't been winning games the same, and there have been a couple ugly ones in this stretch, but I think that they are sort of starting to shift their identity a little bit towards having more of a presence on that defensive end, which is a crucial part for them. They got the All-Star break, which, yes, ended at a bit of a low as it could get, losing to the Memphis Grizzlies right before the break, but they have had the opportunity to sort of take a step back, take a deep breath, and reevaluate their situation. They go into this second half of the season still as the 3 seed in their conference. So it's not like, yes, it has been a rough stretch for them, but it's not like they are, even fighting for a playoff spot. They're a lock to make the playoffs. It's just a matter of what kind of team are they going to be when they get there. We will find out. Another storyline here, LeBron and the Lakers. Yes, I know it's a little bit redundant. It's always LeBron. It's always the Lakers. But I think that I am specifically interested in the fact that this is the first time that we've seen LeBron James have a potential out in his contract since he's been with the Lakers. Now, we've also talked about the fact that he has a $50 million player option after this year, and I think that at the age he's at right now, it is pretty unlikely that he would decline it, but you also have to keep in mind this is LeBron James. Yes, he obviously wants to maximize the amount of money that he can make, but I think that if he truly is unhappy in the situation, and it stems, especially, again, at 39 years old, it stems further than just the basketball. If he likes being in LA, in California, which it seems like he has, his son currently plays for USC, so I'm sure that plays a factor in whether or not Bronny is going to want to try and make the jump to the NBA next year. There are other factors, and $50 million is a ton of money to pass up on, but I don't think we can fully rule out the idea if this season plays out and he is miserable that he would want to just come back. Now, the Lakers are currently the 9 seed. They're 30-26. They decided to stay put at the deadline, as we know, other than signing Spencer Dinwiddie to a contract after he was bought out. So, obviously, no massive moves. Dinwiddie's a nice pickup, but he's not someone that really transforms your expectations for the Lakers. I think going forward, it falls a lot on the laps of LeBron James and Anthony Davis, as it always has. And LeBron James, we know the level of play that he can elevate his game to when the moment calls for it. We saw it in the play-in tournament this year. We saw it in the playoffs last year, that when he is fully dialed in, can he give necessarily the longevity and the 37, 38 minutes of 100% effort that we saw specifically, those Miami years, the second stint in Cleveland, and obviously when he was younger too. But I'm talking about as far as when he was on those true championship contenders, making the finals and such, and actually had a real chance. I think that those years are behind him, but he can still definitely take it to a level when he needs to. I still don't see them as a real contender. I just have doubts about the rest of the team. Now, we're playing good going into the break. We were getting a terrific version of D'Angelo Russell. Austin Reeves, after starting off the year really struggling, he is sort of taken his game up towards another level, starting to be more of the consistent factor that he was last year during their playoff run. And when you look at their playoff run last year, I definitely don't want to diminish what they did, but I think that in the NBA, we've seen plenty of conference finals runs that are sort of a flash in the pan, and the Lakers obviously won the finals in 2020 with a lot of a different core, but with the same centerpieces in LeBron and in Anthony Davis. So, you can't fully call it a flash in the pan from that sense, but they were the 7 seed after really struggling during the year, and they ran into a 2-seeded Memphis Grizzlies that is very young and was without their starting center. So they were playing Xavier Tillman, a solid player, but he was playing over 30 minutes per game. That is not really something that you see from a legitimate 2 seed. And again, legitimate, I'm not trying to diminish the Grizzlies run last year either, but it was that, and it was a Warriors team that was older, and again, not really a lot of size there. So last year was last year. We're moving on to this year, and I just don't know if I really see it with them this season. Now, they're going to have more assets to move going forward here, so they possibly can sort of right this ship in the offseason. But the way that this year plays out, I think, is going to be very crucial for whether or not LeBron James wants to stay with the team, especially after putting out all these feelers to the team that he wanted things to change. And this was the first time we really saw a LeBron James team, the front office that is, say, no, we are not going to fully cave into whatever you want. So I think that's going to be interesting to look forward to. Joel Embiid's timeline is something, because if you look at the state of the Eastern Conference right now, for what was expected to be a better season, I think, for the conference as a whole, we've seen with the Bucks and with Embiid's injury to the 76ers, the true high-level contenders sort of dip off a little bit with the state of the Eastern Conference. And that being said, if Joel Embiid were to play, there would be a very real opportunity for them to make some sort of a run. Still yet to go to the conference finals. We could see that change, but of course we have this whole situation with Joel Embiid. I think the fact that they made the Buddy Hield move this year, who he's an expiring contract, I expect that they are going to try and bring him back for next season. But I think that move said they are expecting him to be back of some capacity. Now, I wouldn't rush him if I were them, because of the history that you've had with him and injuries in the past already. But it seems like they are at least mentally gearing up for trying to make a playoff run here. They're going to get D'Anthony Melton back, which I think is huge. I think he's a wildly underrated player in the NBA who's been dealing with an injury for the past month or so. So that will be an addition for them there. And then I think when you just look at the 76ers here, the key for them is to stay above the 7 seed and the play-in threshold, because especially in those, one-game opportunities, granted, if you have Joel Embiid, healthy or not, that probably determines the future of your playoff run as it is. But I think that, you don't want to sort of flirt with that play-in tournament. They're currently the 5 seed. They're 2.5 games above the 7-seeded Heat. So we will see, because they have been staggering, even a little bit prior to Embiid's injury, where he was missing some games. Tyrese Maxey was missing some games. So they haven't been playing their best basketball, but I do think that the Eastern Conference is pretty open if they were to get the best version of the current team that they have on paper. Next, I have the LA Clippers, where we've seen them sort of be a little bit of a cursed franchise for a lot of their existence, even predating when I was watching basketball. They had the worst win percentage in all of American sports from 1981 to 2014. And then they came into these years with Lob City, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and they were fun, but also had this little bit of a plague with the situation behind the scenes with their owner, Donald Sterling, and the recordings of him being racist, telling his wife, girlfriend, whatever it was, to not bring black people to the game. And it was just a disgusting story that took place on a team that was, at the time, very fun and, very marketable. And then you have the owner in the back who is just nobody wants to associate with that. So he ends up being forced to sell the team. And even then, obviously, you cleanse your organization of the true, toxic ownership, but there still wasn't great vibes, for lack of a better term, within the locker room itself. It's been reported that Chris Paul was very hesitant to give the reins over to an up-and-coming Blake Griffin. He didn't like that Blake was being marketed as their star, and I just feel like they kind of hurt themselves, blow a 3-1 lead during those years, and despite being a regular playoff team, never even made the conference finals, would have if it were not for that blown 3-1 lead. And then obviously we come into this next era where they sort of rejuvenate themselves and, buy into this new nucleus of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and we just haven't seen them be healthy together up to this point. And it's unfortunate because we know the high level of talent they possibly could have with one another, but we just haven't reached the surface yet. They made a conference finals, at least, unlike the Lob City teams, but it was Kawhi Leonard who got injured during that series, and Paul George was incredible against Utah going into the conference finals against the Suns, but they were just undermanned at that point. So they would love to finally get this monkey off of their back. They're moving into a new arena next year. I'm sure that Steve Ballmer, their new owner, would love to be able to enter with a bang and a flash and sort of take over, to whatever extent the Clippers are ever going to be able to take over LA and start this new era off for them on a positive note. And then sort of on that same note of finally being able to get the job done, the Boston Celtics, who have been another team that's been at the top of the standings for the past handful of years, and we saw the transformation when they sort of switched over the reins. They were this fun up-and-coming underdog led by Isaiah Thomas and with, a group of very solid role players, but not true star power, and then we're able to add Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown to that mix, and since then they have been to 4 Eastern Conference Finals and a finals appearance. So we've talked so much about this core, and while I do think the general discussion around the Celtics has been a little bit overcritical, given that they were a younger team and they were still sort of finding themselves, and because you're the Boston Celtics, because you've been in the moment as many times as they have been, they were expected to win already, and because they haven't done that, they've been looked at a little bit as failures to people on the outside. This is their best opportunity yet with adding Drew Holiday, with adding Kristaps Porzingis, and they are the odds-on favorite going forward. And Jason Tatum talked about the idea of becoming the next face of the league, and him and some of his other peers at All-Star Weekend talked about the fact that that starts with winning, and Tatum and the Celtics have a golden opportunity to do so this season. On that note of the next face of the league, we are going to be taking our first break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be discussing who could be the next face of the NBA, as that was a big topic of discussion at All-Star Weekend this past week. So stick with us. We will be right back and get into all of that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just wrapped up talking about some of the storylines going forward in this NBA season as we enter the latter stretch of it until the playoffs. I alluded to it in that last segment with the idea of Jason Tatum potentially winning a championship this year and the fact that he could make an argument for being the next face of the NBA. This was something that was discussed during All-Star Weekend. I'm kind of surprised it was to the level that reporters were sort of reaching out to these young players and even some of the older guys as well. Steph Curry was asked about it, and there were a handful of names that were thrown out in the conversation. According to ESPN, the names a lot consisted of the Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker variety. Luka Doncic was another name in that as well. Adam Silver was even asked about the idea. And, it's interesting to think about what it takes to be the next face of the league. Because if you look at this past generation, obviously LeBron James, the chosen one, it was sort of bestowed upon the NBA of him being this prodigal player for them, and he absolutely delivered through the course of his career. Love him or hate him, you can't deny that he has been just about everything you possibly could have asked of him in terms of being deemed the chosen one while he was in high school. So it's him. Steph Curry has been a massive face of the league for the past handful of years. And Kevin Durant also has a little bit of an argument as well. I think that, his legacy gets all kinds of weird discussions around it because of teaming up with Steph Curry, because of the joining the Warriors after blowing a 3-1 lead to them, all of that. But I have no doubts that Kevin Durant is one of the greatest players of all time. And I think that he, yes, made a decision that wasn't popular with NBA fans, but I don't think that at all takes away from the greatness that is in his career, because it was him being the best player on those championship teams, despite Steph Curry, who is the greatest shooter of all time, one of the greatest point guards of all time, and yet Kevin Durant still, pecking order-wise, was the one. He hit the big shots in LeBron's face during those finals. So, again, what does it take to be that face of the league? Tyrese Halliburton was asked this question. He talked about winning. He said to be the face of the league, winning has to come with that. Whatever young guy takes the charge and is winning moving forward, that's probably who it will be. Now, it's interesting because you look at LeBron James, right? And again, he had this reputation coming into the league as it was that he was going to be as great as he was. But he didn't win until he was 27. By that time, he did have 7 All-NBA selections and 3 MVPs to his name. So the winning is really what took over. Obviously, the marketability, doing the decision. Again, love or hate the decision, nobody is going to tune in necessarily if you have even a typical all-star. People are going to clown on a guy that gets on TV to announce his decision, and LeBron did get clowned on for it to a degree, but the fact that it was the news and the spectacle that it was goes to show how much of a representation of the NBA he is and what kind of effect he had in terms of being the face of the league. So Jason Tatum, as I sort of alluded to in that last segment, he was asked about it as well. He said, "I feel like it's mine to take. I do feel like if we win a championship, it would be more distinguished and clear, but I understand I'm in that short list for sure." Now, as a Celtics fan myself, I have people in my life who hated the fact that he said this. Me personally, I don't mind it. I think that confidence is obviously always something that we're going to see with these NBA players. It's what we expect out of them when it comes to, where do you rank amongst your peers, all those types of questions, because you have to have that mentality. And when you don't have the alpha dog mentality, you also get trashed for that as well. So nobody is ever happy with these types of comments, but when you're Tatum in this instance, I think that he does have a point. He's definitely on the short list. Now, is he going to be the face of the league? That's still to be said, because I think that it does start with winning. He's in a premier basketball market. He has plenty of accomplishments already. Since he came in his rookie year, he has been in the postseason every single year, to the conference finals 4 times and the finals as well. So, there is recognition. Now, his first finals, he was dealing with a wrist injury, not to make excuses, because he did get locked down by Andrew Wiggins in that series, and he was not good down the stretch of those games, and it is a very easy target for NBA fans to criticize him for that. But we also saw a massive collapse from LeBron James in that the first 2 finals series really that he made to. Even though the Cleveland one, it's very forgivable considering the roster that was surrounding him at that point. But losing the first season in Miami to a Mavericks team that on paper was still very good. You have an all-timer in Dirk on that other end, but still LeBron had a disappointing series in that. And the same can sort of be said for Tatum and that series against the Warriors in the 2022 finals. So Tatum, I think, does have a very strong argument. I think that it's interesting when you talk about the face of the NBA. This is fair or not. Me personally, I don't have a preference, but I remember hearing conversations about this even over a year ago, and I forget who it was, so I apologize, but someone made the point of how important is it for the face of the NBA to be an American. And you don't think that should matter all too much, but I do think that there is something when you think about the marketability of an NBA star. Now, I think that Giannis has an incredible personality, and the fact that he's as goofy as he is, and he, has always seemed to be an incredible stand-up person, ultra competitive, which some people sort of get on his case for, but I think that we should want the face of the NBA to be a competitor. Giannis has crazy energy every single game, and I know that some of the quotes that came out this past weekend, I don't know what he's talking about, the idea of I don't watch basketball, I like how it makes it harder for me when I don't know what my opponents are doing. That's a weird thing to say in my opinion, but I still think you look at Giannis, he's entering his prime now, and especially with his sort of play style, it's interesting. How long is it going to hold up? He relies very heavily on his physical attributes, which he's never been injury prone, knock on wood. He has the, accomplishments on both ends of the floor, and he's won a championship. So, like we talked about, winning sort of starts this conversation, and he's done that. He has the MVPs. He's been on all defensive teams. He's won a Defensive Player of the Year award, I'm pretty sure. And I think that he definitely makes an argument for being in that list as well. And when we talk about this face of the NBA, yes, it's LeBron, but like I mentioned, right next to him, I think at least of this recent generation, Curry and Durant have been right there with him. And we can't expect every NBA great or every, big marketable player for the NBA to play until they're 40 years old and to be as good as LeBron James and Steph Curry is into their mid to late 30s. It's very possible that that's the case. We haven't seen longevity in the NBA and really in all sports in general be quite as successful until this generation, where we seem to be a lot better about preserving stars for a longer time. But I question, not question, but like those are the questions sort of surrounding Giannis going forward. I think that Luka is a great potential face of the NBA, especially because you look at the three best players in the NBA today, you probably, if you were to ask the majority of people, you will get some combination, I think, on average, most of Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Luka Doncic. 3 international players. So to that point of, should the NBA, the face of the NBA, be American, we're maybe heading into a direction in the league where there is more international stars, and I think it's great. I love the fact that international basketball has been so much more competitive with basketball and with football. I love, the idea of it becoming more of a global sport. I think that's something where I'm not a soccer fan, but I think that it is really cool just how widespread it is across the world. It's a unifying force, and it also brings a little bit of competitiveness with it as well, because there is that sort of, nationality pride that takes place with that. So you can make an argument we're heading into a little bit of a, international NBA, because you look at, not to mention Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was thrown out in those conversations during All-Star Weekend, and he is Canadian. I know that, North America, he's a little more centralized, but technically he's not American. And then, of course, this past year, we talk about sort of being the prodigy coming into the NBA, Victor Wembanyama, who has been deemed the best prospect for the NBA since LeBron James. And up to this point, he has done a phenomenal job in the NBA. Now, obviously, have been a little bit of growing pains at times. The Spurs aren't good, but he's playing for a historic coach, a historic franchise. Not that I would imagine Greg Popovich is going to be around for the entirety of Wemby's career, but I think that Wemby could sort of be this next coming of these San Antonio legends in David Robinson and Tim Duncan. And, it's not that San Antonio necessarily is the biggest market as a whole, but the Spurs franchise is a very notable one when you talk about NBA history, NBA greats. George Gervin, of course, not quite the level of the Robinson and of the Duncan, but I think that Wemby can absolutely solidify himself as one of these, faces of the league. Now, again, in terms of this idea of it being an American player, I feel like Adam Silver probably to some degree would prefer it to be an American, just because of, the interviews and the conversations and all of that. I think that there's a certain level of marketability. It's home court advantage almost for having an American player be the one, which LeBron James was, Steph Curry was, Kevin Durant was. But we also look who's the face right now of the MLB. I would say it's Shohei Ohtani. Aaron Judge is a little bit in the conversation, but I think it's Ohtani. Ohtani's great. Everybody loves watching him and seeing, what he's up to and everything, but he doesn't speak English, and that's obviously not the case of these NBA players. But I think that, we would be so much more exposed to Ohtani if he spoke more English, if he was American. And, I think that, again, it's not to that level. Luka's personality, and Giannis's as well, like I mentioned. And I love Jokic's personality as well, but Jokic is almost a little too nonchalant, I feel like, to be, like, when you talk about Giannis's competitiveness, and it's not that Jokic isn't, but I think that there's definitely levels. Jokic was treating the playoffs last year like it was just sort of a part-time job. He's like, I just want to go home. I'm, all that. And then he gets to the parade and he lives it up. Then he's like, I want to parade again and all that. And it was fun to see, but I think there's just a lot of factors that go into this. And again, like Halliburton said, like I sort of reiterated at the top of the segment, it starts with winning. So I am curious to see, like Halliburton said, what young player is going to reach those heights, because I think that, Luka is going to win MVPs in his career. I would be shocked if he didn't, and he's going to have the All-NBA selections to his name. Jason Tatum as well. Anthony Edwards a little bit younger, but he's probably on a very similar course as well. So like we talked about, LeBron didn't win his first finals until he was 27 years old. So there's time for these guys, especially as the LeBrons, Currys, and Durants make their way out of the league, but it does require eventually getting to that point, which is why I think that Tatum, if you look at sort of back-to-back All-NBA first teams, I would imagine he's probably going to be All-NBA first team again this year. If he adds a Finals MVP to his resume already at 25, I think he's going to be turning 26 this year, then that is a massive step, and he probably has the edge on all the rest of the players of his generation. But it's still very much so up in the air, and it's not like the NBA is at a point where they're desperate for stars, because we have them all over the place, and we still have that last generation as well that is still holding it down some. So, this is going to be a slow developing thing here, but I found it very interesting that Adam Silver was talking about it during the weekend, that all these players were getting asked about it on social media. There was a tweet that was going viral about what are we going to do when 30, 23, and 35 all retire. That was sparking a lot of debates and conversations around that. So it's just a fun thought experiment to play this out. The reality is we can't know until somebody sort of takes the reins. It can't be something that's just handed down. It has to be one of these players making that jump to get to that level. And, I think that there are a handful of really strong candidates for that. So on that note, we are going to be taking our second break. When we come back, we're going to be sticking with some basketball thoughts. One other takeaway I had from All-Star Weekend in terms of Adam Silver getting asked about the future of the G League Ignite program. So we are going to be taking this next break and touching on that when we get back. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Moving into a segment here talking about the idea of the G League Ignite. This is something that Adam Silver was asked about during All-Star Weekend. He said the future is still sort of to be seen. It seems like it might be a little bit murky. So in case you don't know, the G League Ignite is a program that the NBA first came up with, or introduced at least, in 2020. It was to add a team among the G League, which is the NBA's developmental league, almost the semi-pro teams like in the NHL or the MLB, and where prospects could come straight out of high school and join this one specific team, the G League Ignite, and immediately talent. This was in place of going to college and playing their 1 year there, because the NBA requires at least one post high school year before you can be eligible to enter the NBA draft. And at the time that this program was created, there were not the rules surrounding NIL where athletes were able to make money off of their name, image, and likeness, where there were a handful of cases of programs, individual players getting caught for receiving money in order to go to a school. Right around this time, it was a big storyline where James Wiseman, who ended up being the number 2 overall pick in that 2020 draft, he was ruled ineligible for the majority of the Memphis season, where he was playing his freshman year after dealing with some injuries in high school as well. He comes in, and it was found out that he received some money to go to the school, play under Penny Hardaway, and he was ineligible for the rest of the year. And the NBA sort of stepped in with this Ignite program and said that they could provide these athletes an opportunity. And a lot of these athletes, especially at the time coming out of high school, where they needed money, they wanted to help provide for their family potentially. And the way that Adam Silver put it this past weekend when he was asked about it, the Ignite team was filling a hole that gave prospects an opportunity to make this money while still being eligible to play in the NBA draft a year later. The Ignite was launched in April of 2020, and they took place during the 2020-2021 season, where they would get these developmental prospects together. They would play together with a couple other veteran players surrounding them as well, and they would face off against the other G League developmental teams of the other remaining NBA teams. I don't think every single NBA team, especially at that time, had a G League team, but play against, actual professional basketball players that were on two-way contracts or were trying to, play basketball in America and find a role into the NBA. And we saw a very interesting turn of events where about a year later, it was the NCAA versus Alston Supreme Court case, in which it was ruled that the NCAA could no longer prevent athletes from making money off of their name, image, and likeness. And it sort of changed the, again, necessity of the G League Ignite, because as Silver put it, it was filling a hole that was no longer there. But even still, the Ignite has had a handful of successful individual prospects that have come out of the program. We've seen 4 lottery picks through the 3 seasons that this has taken place. We saw Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Dyson Daniels, and Scoot Henderson all go in the top 10 of the past 3 NBA drafts. And we are likely to see at least one more this year with Matas Buzelis, and could possibly be 2 as well. Ron Holland is another prospect. He's out for the rest of the season with a thumb injury, but we are probably going to see that number of 4 lottery picks increase even more this upcoming NBA draft. Now, the issue with the program is it hasn't really helped develop prospects in the way that they were initially hoping to do so, because you're bringing in a lot of these guys that need to develop. And, you look at the names that they had, such as Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga, very talented players, but, there was a lot of raw talent with them. And you're trying to develop them while also focusing on the other guys that are surrounding them in that same team. And we saw other guys, names that might not stick out quite as much, but Isaiah Todd, Leonard Miller from this past draft class, where they were hoping to also boost their stock, playing against a little bit of elevated opponents in the G League series. And it just, again, the way that this basketball was played, it was a lot of looking out for yourself first. It was players looking to boost their individual stock. So there was a lot of selfish play, a lot of lack of team basketball. I think that Jalen Green has always had the talent, but it has been a little bit of an adjustment for him actually adjusting into a team setting in the NBA. And while I think he has tons of talent, we still haven't seen necessarily the perfect fit in with the rest of the Houston Rockets team, and one that this year is looking to make a little bit more of a jump, play some more team first ball after adding veterans in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks. So with the number of developmental prospects that they have in the league, it also resulted in some of these players not getting enough playing time that they thought they were signing up for. So we've seen some of these guys. Leonard Miller is somebody, he was drafted by the Timberwolves this past year in the second round. I think he's another guy that has a ton of raw potential. I really liked him coming into the draft, and it's tough because he hasn't really played the team structured, mature game that these players are taught during college basketball. And there are lessons, obviously going to school outside of lessons in classes. There are lessons on the court of having that shared goal, playing unselfish basketball, everybody working together, that just hasn't really played out necessarily in the G League Ignite program. So the existence of this program has been a little bit harmful to some of these guys, and I think that in turn it's also hurt the product of college basketball a little bit, because you look at college basketball, there just isn't really that same level of star power that we saw prior to the introduction of the G League Ignite team. And I don't think that the Ignite program is fully responsible for it, but if you look at the couple draft classes right before this took place, you had box office teams. Obviously, you can go back in history and list hundreds of names, but in the years directly prior to the Ignite program, you had that Duke team with Zion, who himself was a spectacle, but he also played alongside RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish. John Morant was in that same year, and he goes out with this Murray State team and wins a tournament game. Anthony Edwards at Georgia, and Georgia wasn't even good at the time, but he himself was, he stood out physically. You could see this guy can be a number one pick and a star in the NBA, and we just don't really see that quite the same anymore, where there are a few names in college basketball right now that you could definitely see potentially go in the top three. Cody Williams for Colorado, Jacoby Walter for Baylor, Rob Dillingham for Kentucky, all very good players and should definitely be on, lottery picks on NBA teams this upcoming season, but there's just not the same level of excitement that we saw in college basketball in past seasons. So in a way, Buzelis is a great player. He grew up in America. He played in Chicago. He went to Brewster Academy in New Hampshire, and he was in the All-American game. But, I've seen one G League game myself because I never even know when they're on. And it's just having these stars with the power. Now, the 2024 class isn't exactly seen to be the strongest of recent draft classes anyways, but I just feel like with the viewership and the weight that comes with college basketball, and the NCAA has never been my favorite organization. I don't know anybody who's, team NCAA and a lot of the things that they do, but college basketball just means something. And it feels like it's meant less. And we've been going through this stretch during the All-Star break where there's no NBA. So I've been watching a lot of college basketball and I'm intrigued by it, but I'm not moved by it the same way because I don't think that there's that same level of star power. So, ultimately, I think that the Ignite was a great idea at the time of its inception, but it doesn't really have the same role anymore than we needed. And these players can make money in college now. So not every prospect wants to go to school for a year. I think that, we should maybe encourage kids to go get an education. But if a prospect just wants to focus on basketball, I don't think you can take that away from them. So we should be able to find some other way to work this out. The NBL, the National Basketball League in Australia, has found a little bit of good balance where they spread out these prospects across different teams in the league. And that also requires the league itself helping to cover some of, if not all of, the contracts that these prospects get paid. And we've seen a handful of different players graduate from that. We saw LaMelo Ball, we saw Ousmane Dieng, Josh Giddey, names like that. So RJ Hampton as well is another one. So, the G League could try and incorporate some sort of a similar idea. I don't have all of the answers necessarily, but I do think that it's something that needs to be worked on one way or another, because I think that while the idea of the Ignite program definitely, was well thought out and was in search of helping these prospects, I don't think it's been quite as beneficial as we were hoping when it was introduced. So those are my takes on the G League Ignite program. Again, it's not that Adam Silver said that this is going to be ended soon. He just said he's not sure what the future of it is. And selfishly, because I like college basketball, I would prefer to see some of these players make their way into college basketball, because I don't know, I just feel like Jalen Green would have been such a fun college basketball player, I feel like. And who knows, maybe in turn we could have also seen him sort of be a little bit more refined as a prospect. That's all hypothetical, up for debate, but it's just something that I am interested in, and I'm curious to see how the league plays it from here. So on that note, we are going to be taking our final break. When we come back on the other side, we're going to be talking some NFL, where there were some very interesting stories that came out yesterday about Nick Sirianni and sort of what helped spark that downhill spiral of the Eagles season last year. So stick with us. We will be right back after the break. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are wrapping up the show here, talking about some NFL and a specific story that really stood out to me in a bit of a strange way yesterday, and that was talking about Nick Sirianni and the way that this Eagles season ended. Supposedly had a turning point during their game against the San Francisco 49ers, where there was this whole debacle around Big Dom. Now, if you don't remember, they were playing this game, the Eagles and the 49ers were, and Dre Greenlaw was on the sideline of the Eagles, and their head of security Dom DeSandro, also known as Big Dom, sort of got in the way a little bit, gave Greenlaw a little bit of a shove, and the two sort of began arguing, and as a result, the NFL looked into it. Big Dom was kicked off the field for that game, and then he was suspended from being on the sideline for the rest of the season. Now, this was just an absurd, funny storyline that was going on in the middle of the season. And again, with the Eagles, who up to that point was a very successful team, and things sort of started to come off the rails. Now, they definitely had issues past just this. Their defensive system was really not working out. They end up having to promote Matt Patricia to their defensive play caller during the middle of the year, and we saw them sort of fall apart. But interesting that yesterday, Eagles reporter Derek Gunn came out and talked about the idea after he posted on Twitter that Big Dom was very much responsible for helping keep Nick Sirianni in check. Now, Sirianni, since he got hired by Philly, passionate has been, the adjective that's described him. He was yelling at Chiefs fans, and he was always sort of embodied the city of Philadelphia in a little bit. Maybe, no offense to any Philadelphians, he was definitely very outward speaking. He was obnoxious, is maybe a word you could use that's a little bit less nice, but the team resonates with him, and that's why I thought that when people were calling for his job after this season, I thought it was kind of crazy because, yes, this season did fall off the rails, but they had just made the Super Bowl a year prior, and this past year, it obviously fell apart on them, but they still made the playoffs, and they came out extremely flat. It was a very embarrassing performance against the Buccaneers. There's no denying that. But I felt like there was a lot going on that Sirianni and that Eagles team sort of had to piece together. They lose both of their coordinators to head coaching positions. They lose their two leading tacklers on defense, which I think was very key in them falling apart. Not to mention that their secondary was very old. Darius Slay is really getting up there in age. They lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So there was a lot of turnover from last year to this year. So as much as I maybe am not the biggest Sirianni fan, I thought that calling for his job after two, semi-successful years, I semi-successful almost feels disrespectful too, because he's made the playoffs twice. He's made the Super Bowl once. So, I guess it's up for a little bit of interpretation. How successful has Sirianni been? But I also don't think that anybody was truly picking the Eagles to be quite as good as they were last year in the NFC and coming out of that conference and putting up the type of fight that they did against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. But I don't think that this is a good look for Nick Sirianni at all. The quote that Gunn used on Twitter was that Big Dom controls Sirianni's emotions on the sideline, which can mean a bunch of different things. I'm not totally sure exactly, because it's not like I feel like I saw, in the moment, Sirianni truly losing control down the latter half of the season. But Gunn also added, in his absence, Big Dom that is, Nick gets in numerous arguments with players/coaches during games. So, incredibly strange. And the Eagles, to be fair, I didn't see Sirianni necessarily himself getting into fights, but it's not even totally fair, because some of the A.J. Brown drama where he was getting into arguments with Jalen Hurts, that was happening very early in the season. So I'm not sure if, you can put it all on this idea that Big Dom was the keeper of Nick Sirianni, and they were able to completely free fall because he was gone. I think that, again, there was a lot of stuff going on there in Philadelphia that Sirianni and the Eagles had to keep in check. But for somebody that has seemed to be a little bit, again, not even irrational, but just very unhinged almost at times in Sirianni in terms of what we typically see from a, professional standpoint of an NFL coach. And that can mean all types of things as well. It's not like there's one cookie cutter idea of what it should look like. But Sirianni, he's definitely been very loud, very outspoken. He's just 42 years old, so he's still on the younger side. And, you had guys like Fletcher Cox, a leader, a staple of this Eagles defense for a handful of years now. He was immediately shutting down reporters who were, contemplating the idea of should Sirianni be out for next year. So he definitely, it's not like this would be something that would cause him to lose his job today, but I do think that it plays a little bit of an interesting role as how we view Sirianni for next season. I think that the Eagles are under some sort of pressure to win next year. The NFC is open, and they do have a lot of talent on the roster still. I think they need to address their secondary for sure. Their linebacker core hasn't been great. The first round guy they drafted last year out of Georgia, Nolan Smith or something. Nolan Smith. He did not have a very great season for them. So you are hoping that they can sort of, take a step back in the right direction. Not saying they necessarily need to win the Super Bowl next year, but to come out in the playoffs and have that type of a performance that they did, that can't happen again. And especially now we're looking at a team that has given Jalen Hurts the contract, which I do think was deserved, but you're going to have to see sort of what the limitations of this team are. Jalen Hurts was sort of seen to be not the highest ceiling guy coming out of school after, getting replaced by Tua at Alabama, going to Oklahoma and putting together a very, very good season, but he fell to the second round for a reason. And it's a matter of once he's making $40+ million, is he going to be able to elevate a team that some of these other elite quarterbacks can do? And for Sirianni, where they go out, they have a very successful first season, take a step back this next year, can you sort of bring yourself back in, bring the team back in, not fight with the guys that are on your sideline? Again, this is an Eagles reporter that came out with all of this. So, if anybody is going to have an insight on the team, it's somebody like this. But in Gunn, that is, the reporter. But, definitely a concerning sign. And for him to, remain the Eagles coach going forward, he's going to have to find a way to check himself. And, we've seen coaches in the past be a little bit over the top. Sean McVay had a strength and conditioning coach that would follow him around and pull him back off of the field when he was getting worked up. He was the get back coach, and he held him back through that. And McVay has been a little unhinged himself at times, running into the end zone during that game they had in the regular season a couple years ago against the 49ers, where there's definitely a McVay-Shanahan rivalry that goes on within that own division, with McVay and Shanahan coming from the same coaching tree, all of that. And I think that, it's not uncommon to see sort of these new age coaches having that extra juice, that extra passion, but you have to put it in the right places. And holding your players accountable is one thing. I'm curious what the extent of these altercations he was getting in with his own sideline really were. So I'm sure we're going to be getting some more information on this as the days come. This just came across my attention last night, and I thought that it was an absurd sort of story how this Big Dom, who for the common NFL fan had never heard of until that one moment where he gets into it with Dre Greenlaw and supposedly how important he possibly could have been. Now, there were stories that came out afterwards, from that altercation talking about how great of a guy Big Dom is. And I have no doubts that Big Dom might be an amazing person. But how could the head of security for your team, I understand if he's a calming presence and all of that, but to have such an effect where his absence takes you to a level where you lose control, that's just a very fascinating concept to me. And I'm very curious to see how this all plays out, because I would probably bet that Big Dom isn't going to be allowed on the sidelines next year. Once you're again, not even on the coaching staff, you are somebody that works in security, and you directly apply yourself and, get into the game itself and the antics of all of that, the NFL probably isn't going to let you come back. And who knows? We'll see. I'm sure that if he's that important, the Eagles are probably going to try and argue for him to stay along. But, who knows? Just such a crazy story that came out. And the Eagles are just such a fascinating, case going forward for me here, because I think that there's a lot of talent and a lot of potential, but a lot of unproven. And we're just going to have to see how it goes from here. But that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow, 2 o'clock, as always. Thank you very much to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Finally got NBA games tonight. So on that note, we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that